Hey everyone, welcome to session 3 of the Debate Hub. In this session, we'll go over the basics of argumentation. We'll have separate lessons for the rebuttal, summary, and final focus speeches. So this lesson will primarily be focused on the art of constructing and the constructive speeches from the first pro and con speakers.
Here's a question for you all. How do you prove an argument is true? I think a necessary component of achieving this is that you need to back all your arguments up with reasoning. And those reasons need to apply for arguments that are analytical just as much as they do for arguments that are backed up by statistics. If your opponent stands up and says, "Oh, look, I have a statistic to prove my point. I have these quantifiable numbers," if they're not able to give the reason for why those numbers aren't true, that's a fallacy in the argument you could point out. In debate, these reasons are called warrants. This is probably the single most important takeaway you could have because every single argument needs to be backed up by a warrant. So, Sam, what are all the parts of an argument, especially in the context of the first two constructive speeches?
So there's really four major components to every argument, and we'll dissect them using two examples. The first concerns a climate change policy, and the second concerns a healthcare policy. The first part of every argument is uniqueness. Uniqueness says there's a problem or lack thereof in the status quo.
The second part of an argument is the link, which describes how voting pro or con would solve the problem described in the uniqueness section. In the context of the climate change example, a link would be to implement the carbon tax, which would disincentivize companies from using unsustainable sources of energy like coal and fossil fuels because of fear of being taxed. For the healthcare example, we could decrease the cost of healthcare by implementing a policy like Medicare for All, which would give all Americans free insurance.
Last but not least, each argument should have a quantified impact, which is the consequences of voting either pro or con. The pro usually wants to say that in the absence of a given policy, there's going to be a set of harms or some benefits that you're missing out on. And the con wants to say the inverse. If you pass a policy, it'll lead to X and Y harms. In the context of our examples, first about climate change, if you don't pass a carbon tax, climate change will accelerate. Forest fires, droughts, and flooding will get even worse across the globe, displacing millions of people and costing millions their lives. In the context of healthcare, if you didn't pass Medicare for all, then thousands of families could go into poverty because of out-of-pocket medical expenses, or they might have to forego healthcare as a whole at the expense of their health. Now, let's put our skills into practice. We're going to be on the con side on the resolution resolved. The United States federal government should ban zoos, so we're going to say that they should not ban zoos. Just for the simplicity of this activity, we're not going to have any evidence, but usually each of these parts of these arguments should be backed up with its unique set of evidence.
Our argument is going to be about the economic benefits of keeping zoos around. Let's start with our uniqueness. In the status quo, millions of people visit zoos each and every year, creating thousands of new jobs and stimulating the economy. Our link is that banning zoos would destroy the zoo industry because zoos would no longer exist. There are a few impacts to that. Our first impact is that banning zoos would mean that millions of people currently working in zoos, like the caretakers of animals, as well as the administration and the front desk, would lose their jobs. The impact of this job loss is that without jobs, people lose their income streams, increasing poverty rates. And the terminal impact to poverty is that it increases the chance of death as families can no longer afford basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare. A second impact that could arise is that banning zoos would push the economy into a recession because, as we explained earlier, it would cause massive economic turmoil by eliminating thousands of current jobs. Again, a recession would be devastating as it would push millions of people into poverty not only in the United States, but across the world. And we have the same terminal impact about poverty here. Poverty increases the chance of death as families can no longer afford basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare. We want to note, and this might be a bit counterintuitive, but all things can be impacts, but only some things can be terminal impacts. Here's the distinction. The terminal impact is the most impacted out form of an impact itself. For example, poverty can be an impact because it affects millions of people, but you want to terminalize poverty to a decrease in quality of life or even death, as we've done here. That's going to wrap it up for session 3. Hopefully you understand how to construct an argument now, and come back for session 4 so you learn how to refute arguments in the future. Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.